Okay, so now we're getting into the ferns. We talked about the bryophytes, the mosses, last time. And they're, again, they fit into where we have these vascular plants, okay, whereas the mosses did not have xylem and phloem. Our ferns then start to have vascular plants. And so that's the conducting tissue which was developed. You also have the formation of true leaves and the formation of more than rhizodes, of actual roots that anchor and absorb, again with their conductive tissue, water and nutrients up to the leaves. The gametophytes in this group are also much smaller, where they were a significant part of the mosses biomass. They become much smaller and much less of a necessity for the sporophyte to grow. So 4 phyla of the seedless vascular plants include excuse me, Coelophyta, Lycophyta, Equisitophyta, and Polypodiophyta. Okay, and we're going to stick mostly with the Polypodiophyta, which are the true ferns. But we'll go through the other ones just briefly. First, Coelophyta. There's an example of one from the genus Coelotum here. Okay, have some very kind of thick and structured stem-like structures there. They have neither true leaves nor roots, so we don't have true leaves in this group. But they have structures which are similar in their function as far as photosynthetic ability to leaves. Their stems and their rhizomes fork evenly, so you see the forking action in this stem here. Okay, and as it grows higher and higher, you get more and more forking of the stems. And then in Lycophyta, this is a lycopodium here. These are plants covered with microphyls, and microphyls are leaves with single vein, okay, whose trace is not associated with the leaf gap. Okay, so they just have one vein going down the center. All right, Equisitophyta are, here's an example over here of an equisetum in the genus. They have sporophytes with ribbed stems containing silica. Okay, so they have silica, and silica is a substance which helps to reduce herbivory. They also have whorled scale-like microphyls that lack chlorophyll. Okay, so you can see this whitish areas here. These are the areas which lack chlorophyll. All right, and then the true ferns, Polypodiophyta, have sporophytes with larger megaphylls, so ferns can get quite large, and they are usually very divided in their leaflets. And so we would also refer to them as megaphylls rather than microphylls. And they have more than one vein and a leaf trace that is associated with a leaf gap. Alright, so we're going to go into the Polypodiophytas in detail, where we're not going to mention the other three anymore. So the Polypodiophyta vary in size from a tiny floating form, less than 1 centimeter, to giant tropical tree ferns, which are up to 25 meters tall. Most of the ferns you think of are kind of the smaller, 2 feet or so in height, and 5 or 6 feet in diameter. These megaphylls are referred to as fronds. Okay, so it's a frond, which is filled with leaves. And those leaves can then be divided into smaller and smaller segments. They require water for their sexual reproductive lifestyle, so you will usually find them in very moist and wet environments. their sporophyte is the conspicuous phase, or the phase which is most seen. They have, again, fronds, rhizomes, which are connecting really laterally, horizontally on the ground, and then the roots which go into the ground. The fronds first appear coiled, so this is as it's growing out of its progenitor tissue, and make what these structures called a fiddlehead, and then they unroll and expand, and they're exposing their leaves. The fronds are then subdivided into multiple segments called pinnae, or a singular would be a pinna. Their sporangia have stalks on them, and they may be on the lower leaf surface, generally also on the underside of the leaf, confined to the margins, or they're also found in discrete clusters called sori. So here's one sorus, and then this is kind of a flap of tissue covering everything called the insidium. And they often have heavily walled brownish cells called the annulus surrounding the sori. The annulus helps to disperse the spores out of the sporangium by kind of bursting and catapulting them out. So when they go through meiosis, they form these spores, and so then they have this haploid part of their life cycle. And those spores then germinate and grow into a gametophyte called a prothalli. So here's a prothalli here, kind of a heart-shaped. These are small, but these are generally, an inch or two in diameter. They are one-celled thick, and they have archegonia and antheridia on the underside. When the archegonia and antheridia produce sperm and egg, they will fertilize the egg in the archegonia, and then that zygote, fertilized egg, will develop into a sporophyte, which is the conspicuous form. The gametophyte then dies, and it leaves the sporophyte to anchor into the ground independently. So, unlike the mosses where the sporophyte gave nourishment to the sporophyte was dependent on the gametophyte. It grew on top of the gametophyte. Here, the gametophyte sets the stage for fertilization, some of the first rounds of cell division, but then the sporophyte outgrows it. Okay, so here's the full life cycle, and we'll go over this more in detail in class. All right, so there are many fossil relatives of ferns that show up in the fossil record, approximately starting in the Devonian, which is 375 million years ago. These are the likely ancestors of true ferns today. They look more like whisk ferns, but they were probably just the typical ancestors of our ferns today. There are also some found in the Carboniferous age from 320 to 250 million years ago, and this is when tree ferns, so some larger ferns, were more abundant before they got replaced basically by seed-bearing plants. In some of the fossil tree ferns, however, you do find some seeds. So there is some evidence that they gave rise then to seed-bearing plants. Oops. All right, finally, the ferns are of economic and human relevance because they make great houseplants. So you have a fern in your house, and it does well to filter out the air, filter out whatever substances are floating around in there, and provide oxygen. They're also outdoor ornamentals, so you can have these ferns in your yards. They are sometimes, the roots and the rhizomes are sometimes cooked for food, sometimes used for folk medicines. They're used in thatchings for houses to help in some of the construction of houses. And finally, they have, because of their kind of long and slender structure, have properties which make it useful in basket weaving.